Yo, what is up, guys, and welcome back to the BTM channel. And in today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different that I have not done on my channel, but this is something I enjoy doing and also enjoy talking about. So I figured I might as well bring it to the channel, see if you guys like it, and maybe we'll make some more of these. I don't know. But what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the AFC North player props and season-long player props, and I'm going to basically be giving my reasoning for why you should take a line or why you should avoid a line. So hopefully obviously hopefully if you're watching this video you know what that means, but of course, like I said, if you do not know what that means and you're underage and you're not supposed to be betting, do not, you can watch, but don't be doing it, obviously. So quick disclaimer before the video starts, and yeah, without further ado, let's get straight to it. Also, quick disclaimer before we start on Lamar Jackson, he's got to be our first player. Basically how I'll do this video is I'm gonna go through positionally. So first I'll start with quarterback, then I'll go running back, then I'll go wide receiver / tight end. Obviously most teams, they don't really have like tight end props, but you know what I mean. So we're not gonna be doing like kicker and defense, kicker and defensive, like sacks is another one for players on the defensive line and whatnot. So we're not gonna be doing those. But nonetheless, starting off, we have Lamar Jackson as our first player. So also another thing I forgot to mention, I will not be doing any like props that aren't on every single website or betting app. So for instance, like passing plus rushing touchdowns, passing plus rushing yards, that's not on every app for every player. So we're just gonna avoid that. And yeah, so enough talking, let's get straight to it. So how we're gonna do this is I'm gonna give my reasoning and look at the stats and kind of show you why I'm taking a prop or why I'm avoiding a prop. So first and foremost, we're going to start with passing interception and passing yards. Okay, so for the passing yards, I am going to be avoiding that line. I will not be taking the passing yards for Lamar Jackson. Obviously, they are set at 3,525, and then I also am avoiding his passing interceptions. It's just the passing interceptions isn't as bad, but I'm gonna show you why right now. So, of course, his passing yards, again, they're set at 3,525. If you look through his career, last year he had a down year, but he only had 2,242 passing yards. 2021, he only had 2,282. 2020, again, this is like MVP Lamar, played every single game. Again, only 2,757 passing yards. And I know he's got all the weapons he needs now, but I still think the line is a little bit high for him. I think you either avoid it or you take the under. Like I said, most of these lines, I would say just avoid them. I'm not saying any of these, take the under. But, yeah. And then his passing interceptions, again, you look, in 2022, he had 7 interceptions. In 2021, he had 13 interceptions. In 2020, again, this is the MVP year, he had 9 interceptions. So, I mean, he's bounced around. He's had games where he's, or he's had seasons where he's been really good, and he's had seasons where he's kind of, he's just been all over the place. So, and I think they're going to be passing the ball a lot more, so I think you just avoid his interceptions line. I just don't think it's a smart line to take this year for Lamar Jackson. And then the last 2 player props I'm going to be looking at are his. Also, if you see I'm looking down, that's because I've kind of made notes of what I think you should take and what I think you should avoid. So next line we're going to be looking at is passing touchdowns, and then we're going to look at rushing yards after that. So his passing touchdowns is set at 23.5, so he basically needs 24. And I will be taking his passing touchdowns. I actually like where this line's at. So, of course, when you look at it last year, he had 17 passing touchdowns. And again, last year was a really bad year for Lamar. And he also was like hurt for the last, however many games of the year. So I think he's going to get a lot better there in the passing touchdowns. historically, he hasn't been great in the passing touchdowns. But again, like this in 2021, it's like he had one touchdown so many times. And, you know, like I said, I just think last year with those terrible receivers he had, I think it's only got to get better from here. And I do think he will be able to hit that 24 passing touchdowns mark. It's definitely not my favorite bet, but I would say it's a fairly safe bet to take, you know, him getting 23.5 passing touchdowns. And then the next line is his rushing yards. This line I am avoiding. Basically, when you look at it, in 2022, he had 764 rushing yards. In 2021, he had 767. And in 2020, he had 1,000 rushing yards. So, of course, you're like, well, why wouldn't you take that? You know what I'm saying? He's been basically perfect every year. Again, like I said, I still, you know, this might not be a bad line. He might still go over. But like I said, I think, number one, if he gets hurt, you're going to be in jeopardy. But I honestly think they are going to be passing the ball a lot more. And I just don't think rushing is going to be as big. You know, he's not going to have to do as many read options every play. Like, it's just not what he needs. You know, he's got to have to do. So, those are my player props for Lamar Jackson. So, quick recap. The only line I would be taking for Lamar Jackson is his passing touchdowns. I think he's going to get a lot better, and he's going to hit that line this year. Righty, next player up is Joe Shiesty. You already know, man. And what we're going to be looking at for Joe Burrow is, again, the same stat lines. Again, passing yards, passing touchdowns, passing interceptions, and rushing yards. So, again, those are on pretty much every sports book you look at. So, of course, Joe Burrow, I think this year is, you know, I think this could be MVP Joe. You know, I really do. I think this got to be one of his better years. But, nonetheless, that does not mean I'm going to be taking all of his lives. So, first of all, we'll start off with passing yards. This line, 4,425, I am taking this line. I really like where this line's at for him. When you look at, you know, years past, you know, he had 4,475, so just over that last year. And then you know, go back to 2021. Again, we're just got to be looking at 2021 and 2022 because 2020, you know, obviously he's tore his ACL, MCL, so, you know, not really, you can't really look at that as much. And then 2021, of course, he had 4,600 passing yards. So I personally don't see a way in which this number goes down this year. I think, like I said, he's got the best offensive line he's ever had in his career. I think this number is not going to go down. And if anything, I think you got to take the over. And yeah, I will definitely be taking this over for sure. I really like where this line's at. Next stat line we're going to be looking at is his rushing yards. So, let's see here. Okay, rushing yards over here. So, it's kind of the smaller column over here where my mouse is at. So, his rushing yards is set at basically he needs 200 rushing yards. This is a line I would just avoid for Joe. I mean, he had 257 last year. You know, basically kind of crushed the line. But then you go back to 2021 and he had 118. So, I just think he's not a runner. I would say you just want to avoid this line. I think he definitely could hit it, but the goal is he's not got to be running out of the pocket too much. So I would say avoid that line. Next up we got is his passing touchdowns. So this is another line. I think you could take it, but me personally, I am probably going to be avoiding this line at 33.5. So he basically needs 34 passing touchdowns. Of course, last year he had 35, and in 2021 he had 34. So, you know, obviously he's, you know, right around the number. I think it's gotta depend. You know, it's such a tight gap that I think it's probably smarter to avoid it. I would say if you're risky better, you can take it, and I you know, you might get it, you might not. But me personally, I think smarter decision here is going to be avoiding that 33.5 passing touchdowns. So it's a little bit too close, but like I said, you know, it's hard to tell. That he could easily pass that, but it's hard to know. And then last but not least is his interceptions. This is a line I am taking. I love this line. I'm going lower on his passing interceptions. Yeah, when you look at last year, he had 12 interceptions. You know, well, first of all, let's start in 2021. So this was like, he actually had a lot more interceptions, but not by a whole lot. And again, this is inflated by this 3 interception game. And again, as Joe goes throughout the season, as he gets more healthy, he always gets better at not throwing interceptions. And so 2021, he barely, you know, went over. Obviously, he went 1.5 over. But in 2022, again, me watching all these games, I've already taken this under because, like I said, I love it where it's at. He had 4 interceptions against the Steelers. Again, he was coming to, you know, he's coming off that appendix injury, extremely roughed up. I think, you know, and he still didn't have 12.5 interceptions. So I think you got to smash the under here. I love where it's at. Yeah, I mean, the only times I really saw Joe throw interceptions this year was if, you know, he threw it and it got tipped up in the air by the defensive lineman. Like, that was it. So I think he definitely, this is a great line where it's at for Joe Burrow. Alrighty, so starting off with Deshaun Watson's passing yards, it is set at 3,625. I do like this line. I think it's at a very good spot when you look at. Also, this is a much easier way to look at this. I'm not gonna lie. When you look at him, you know, Deshaun did not have the best year last year. Of course, he only played 6 games, but nonetheless, I still think, you know, after not playing for that long, I still think Deshaun's got a lot of, you know, after a full off season, I think he's got to be much better. And even 1,000 passing yards in 6 games is not awful. It's not great either, you know, but I still think he's going to get back to kind of this range. Of course, you know, he'll play the full season. I think this is a good line where it's at. Is, you know, so me personally, I like where the line's at. I like it where it's at. So you know, I just think you got to take the over here on the 3,625 passing yards. He's got some more weapons as well. I mean, the team's just gotten better, so I really like where this is at. And then next up, let's see. Next up, we got his rushing yards. So this is another stat I actually like a lot. So it's set at 399.5. So of course he needs 400 rushing yards. When you look at his career rushing, here we go. So he's, you know, in kind of his prime years in Houston, he got 400 rushing yards almost every single year. And then you look at Cleveland last year. In just 6 games, he had 175 rushing yards. So obviously, in a full 17-game season, 400 is very doable for Deshaun Watson. So I really like where this is at for him. I think, you know, he could easily get 400 rushing yards. And then next up, we got are his passing touchdowns. Now, this line I personally don't like. I think it's an okay line, but me personally, it's not my favorite. You know, so of course, again, it is set at 25.5. He needs 26. Of course, the highest, you know, he had obviously his big prime here in Houston, but, you know, in 6 games, he only had 7 passing touchdowns. The Browns are a more run-heavy team. That's where I think that, you know, you might want to avoid this one for him because it's, like I said, Nick Chubb's got to be a beast this year. You know, we'll get to him here in a couple minutes, but I think you avoid his passing touchdowns line. And then if you look, here's his interceptions. So I actually do like where his interceptions are at. So he would basically need 12 interceptions to, you know, break it. So when you look at it, he's only had 12 interceptions once in his career. And again, like I said, this is a more run-heavy team. I think, you know, him passing the ball has got to be a little bit less. Like I said, I still think he's got to have a very good year. But I think interceptions-wise, I don't think he's got to get to that 12 mark again. I think he's I think he's fine. Okay, and then looking at Kenny Pickett, starting off with his passing yards, 3,300. I do not like this line. I don't. It's just, for me, it's just, I got to see more from him. Obviously, he played 13 games last year. You know, the Steelers generally rely on the run quite a bit. You know, so of course he would need 900 more passing yards in about 4 more games, which is very doable. But when you know, it's just, he is not a big passer at all. that's where I'd like to see another year from him. I think he's got to have a great year, but I don't know how I feel about that 3,300. I think it's got to be close, but I would avoid it. I wouldn't, I just wouldn't touch that line. Then looking at his, let's see what I got next. So they don't have rushing yards for him. I'm not sure why. But looking at his passing touchdowns, there it is, 18.5. So he would need 19. Again, this is a line I would just avoid. I just do not like it. It's he had 7 touchdowns in 13 games, which is just ridiculous, by the way. I mean, that's ridiculous. But again, that's all we've seen from him. So to me, I like to have a little bit of evidence, to why I would take the over on that. So for me, I'm avoiding that line. 13 games, 7 touchdowns. I'm not liking that. And then next up, we got his interceptions. Again, this is another line I would avoid. I would just be avoiding Kenny Pickett, overall. He had 13. This one, I would say, is my favorite line out of all his. He had 9 interceptions in 13 games. I think, he's the number one guy, get better. And, I think, if anything, this would be the best line. But still, again, I think it was too, from last year, it was too close for me. I would just avoid Kenny Pickett. Overall. Alrighty, we are on to the running backs. Hopefully things will start to get moving. My bad, y'all, for this is gotta be a long video. If you're still watching, thank you, first of all. But it's gotta be a long video. I'm trying to explain myself fully why I would take these and why I wouldn't. And so my bad for taking time up. Let's get going. So for Najee. And for all the running backs, I just did rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I didn't do receiving touchdowns. Some guys don't have receiving touchdowns. It just depends on the player. So, Najee, his rushing yards, I actually decently like where this line's at. So, of course, you look at, he has, he basically needs 1,000 rushing yards. And when you look at, his, first 2 years in the league, he has reached that both times. And I just don't, I don't see a reason. I get, I'm saying, a lot of people are saying, the RB, they're going to start using Jaylen Warren a little bit more. But I still think Najee had a terrible year last year. I think he can't really get much worse than last year. So that's where I'd say, maybe, I would take the over. I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm taking the over easily. But I would still take it. And his rushing touchdowns, I would avoid. It's, the line's set at 7. He had 7 last year. He had 7 this year. He had 7 last year. He had 7 in 2021. I would just avoid it. I mean, it's, it's right where he's hit it every time, but he's only tied it. So I would avoid it. And then next up is Joe Mixon. So with Mixon, first of all, we're going to be looking at his rushing yards. I actually like where this line is at. So he would basically need 826 rushing yards to get past this line. So when you look at it, of course, last year he had a terrible year. It was not a good year for him. He only had 814 yards rushing. But then you look at all of his fully healthy seasons. And again, that's where, this is another one of those lines. I would take it, but I would be cautionate, when you're taking it. Because I think if he stays healthy, if he plays every game, and again, last year he only played 14 games. So that's where you got to just consider that is, if he plays every game, I think he's easily getting, 825 rushing yards easily, without a doubt. So you just got to be cautionate there. But I think he's got, the O-line's gotten a little bit better. I still think, and like I said, last year he had a bad year. And, he just took a pay cut. So I just think he's in for a really good year this year. And I would definitely take the over on his rushing yards. I think it's at a good spot. And then looking at his rushing touchdowns, I would not take this. He's been just all over the place with his rushing touchdowns. He's had 7, 13, 3, 5, 8, 4. I mean, it's just all over the place. He's only gone over it twice in his career. And, he's getting more work in the receiving game a little bit. So I would just avoid where his rushing touchdowns are at 7. And, that's that's my overview for Mixon. All right, next player up is J.K. Dobbins. I'm not gonna do too much talking here. I'm gonna be honest. We're not even gonna look at his stats. So J.K. Dobbins so far in his career has been a extremely inconsistent player. last year he reached this rushing touchdowns line. The year before that, he did not reach it. And it's just, he is just always hurt. And I think rushing touchdowns, again, is just a very inconsistent stat. I don't know if he's reached this rushing yards line. I think he might have reached it in 2021. But he is just always hurt. He already has a lingering knee injury. I just would avoid J.K. Dobbins flat out. And, yeah, on to Nick Chubb. Alrighty, looking at Nick Chubb, he is one of my favorite players this year, not only in fantasy, but in betting as well. So, I love both of his props, his rushing yards and his rushing touchdowns. So, he needs 1,300 rushing yards, and he needs basically 10 touchdowns. So, of course, when you look at it, again, assuming he stays healthy the whole year, he had 1,500 rushing yards last year. He had 1,259 rushing yards the year before that. And the year before, again, he was hurt, and he only had 1,000. So, obviously, if he had played a couple more games, I think he would easily, be almost perfect, ever since 2019 at hitting this line. So, I mean, he's been, very good. Of course, I guess he didn't hit in 2021, but yeah, I mean, he's going to have a very good breakout year. Kareem Hunt's gone. He's got to have a great year. He had 12 touchdowns last year, and Kareem Hunt honestly took away a lot of touchdowns from him in years past, and he's had at least 8 touchdowns every year. So I think easily he's got to get at least 9 touchdowns. Yeah, I love Nick Chubb this year. So I would say take the over on his rushing yards and his rushing touchdowns. And yeah, we are now on to the receivers. So for the receivers, we are going to be looking at receptions, receiving touchdowns, and receiving yards. Those are going to be the 3 lines we look at. Again, not every sports book has 100, receiving yards and whatnot. So that is what we're going to be looking at. So starting off, we will start off with his with the props I like. So I like his receiving touchdowns and I like his receiving yards. So of course, he's his third year in the league. Of course, third year breakout could be coming. I mean, he already broke out like for year 1, so it doesn't really matter. But I think his receiving yards is it's a great spot for him. It's a great spot for him to take the over. He needs basically 1,300 receiving yards. And when you look at it, last year he only played 12 games because he had a little injury. And he had 1,046 yards. So obviously if he plays literally like 2 more games, I bet he could get it. Like he's that good. So I think that's a really good line for him. And then looking at his receiving touchdowns, he needs 10 touchdowns. Of course, year 1, he played all 17 games. He had 13 touchdowns. Last year, he only played 12 games, and he had 9 touchdowns. So I think, again, this is another line that's very good for Jamar. I really like where this line's at. I would take those, and then I would avoid his receptions. It's set at 95.5, so he needs 96. Of course, he has not hit that yet. I'm not sure why it's inflated. Well, I know why it's inflated because he only played 12 games last year and he had 87 catches. This is where line I would just avoid. I think until you see him do it, like I said, that's just me personally. I would avoid it. But I definitely could see logic in taking it. But I would say receiving touchdowns and receiving yards is the best lines for Jamar. Next up is T. Higgins. And first of all, we'll start with the lines I do not like, which is his receiving yards and his receiving touchdowns. So now he has almost been perfect in hitting these every single year. And I do think if you are going to take one of these lines that I'm about to tell you not to take, I would definitely take his receiving yards. So his receiving yards is set at he basically would need another 1,000 yards receiving. But basically how I kind of looked at it was in 2021, of course, he easily got it with Jamar and everything like that. But then in 2022, he played almost every single game. And, of course, Jamar was not there. And he only had 1,029 receiving yards. So it's like, once Jamar comes back, he's probably got to take a little bit of the usage. But honestly, like, I might change my answer here. I almost would say, like, he's so good. He's such a good player. And in 2020, again, this is when Joe tore his ACL, MCL. He still almost had. So I don't know. I honestly might take his receiving yards. I'm not gonna lie. I don't mind where it's at. I might change my answer. And his receiving touchdowns is set at 6.5. I mean, he had 6 in 2021. He had 7 in 2022. I would just avoid it. It's just too close. Who knows what he's got to get. And then let's see. And then the one I actually like is his reception. So he had 70.5. The line set at 70.5. He's, in 2021, 2022. Again, this is basically when Joe was fully healthy. He had 74 catches and he had 74 catches. So I don't see it going down. So I would definitely take that line where it's at. Alrighty, starting off with Tyler Boyd. I'm gonna do the line I like the least probably, which is his receiving yard. No, what I marked down. No, his receiving touchdowns. So again, touchdowns are just very fluky to me. He had 5 last year. He had 5 the year before. He had 4. He had 5. He had 7. Majority of the time, he does go over, but it is so close to 4 that I think I would have personally avoided and take the under. So, or not take the under. I would just avoid it. And then the lines I like are his receiving yards and his catches. So, of course, receiving yards are set at 675. So he basically needs 700 receiving yards. Last year he got it. The year before that he got it. The year before that he get the pattern. He gets the receiving yards most of the time. He is Joe's safety blanket, and that is partially why I like his receptions. His receptions is set at 57.5. Last year he had 58, so he just barely got it. But again, like I said, he is Joe's safety blanket. He's a sure-handed guy. He's got some of the best hands in the league. So I would say his receptions and his receiving yards are both good lines as well. So I would take both those. And next up, we got the Ravens receivers. Alrighty, first receiver up is Bateman. We're not even gonna look at stats for him. Bateman so far, I believe he's had 2 years in the league. When I was looking at the stats, he has not hit this line. He hasn't even been close. He struggles a little bit with injuries. This is again, I think he's a good receiver, but I got to see him do it. I got to see him do it before I tell you guys to say, oh yeah, take the over. So this is a guy I would just personally avoid this year, but if you got that confidence in him, take it. Next receiver up is Zay Flowers. This is a receiver I really like this year. I think, of course, this kind of goes against my principle. We have not seen him do it yet, but what I've heard in training camp and just the news around the league is that Zay Flowers has been showing out. He's looked very good during drills, and I just think he's going to be the main target of Lamar. That's what they've been saying. They've been connecting pretty well during practices and whatnot, so I think Zay Flowers is in for a very good year, and I think 600 receiving yards is easily doable for him. And I would take the over here. Okay, again, this is another player, me personally, I'm avoiding. So, again, like I said, if you guys want to do the research on these guys, please do. But I'm avoiding Odell. He's been obviously very injury prone, has not played a lot in the basically, since he got off the Giants, he has just not been able to hit any of these lines very easily. He's of course hit them sometimes, but I mean, he's just been all over the place with these lines. So I would personally avoid Odell. I just would avoid him. And that is the Ravens receivers. And next up, I believe, let's see. Oh, wait, no, we got one more. We got Mark Andrews. Alrighty, so this is easily my favorite Ravens receiver. And he's not even a receiver. He's a tight end. But I'm loving his receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. Now, obviously, again, they pulled in all these weapons and all that, and I get it. They're going to take away some of his usage, but I still think Lamar and Mark Andrews got kind of that connection that's just every year it's good, So last year he had 847, and again, this is with Lamar hurt, which is, again, that is over that 825, receiving yards mark, and then obviously you look historically, he's been pretty solid there as well. And again, like this year, he only played 14 games, so he could probably catch up to that mark. So I really like where that's at. Receiving touchdowns, same deal. Like I said, he's always Lamar's safety blanket. Last year, he only had 5 touchdowns, but again, he did not have Lamar, for the full year. So that's where I think, 6.5 is a good line for him. I think he can definitely get over that. Again, not my favorite line, but I still think Mark Andrews is a good value where his lines are at. Steelers receivers are up. And man, bro, I was so pissed when I was doing this research and I saw these lines. I was like, bro, how did I not see these before? I am loving these 2 lines for Diontae Johnson. 82.5 receptions and 800. He basically needs 836 receiving yards. So you look at last year. Again, last year was a down year for Diontae Johnson. He had 882 receiving yards. He had 1,000 the year before. He had 923 year before. And then his rookie year, of course, like I said, me personally, I don't count the rookie year as much, for some guys. But, yeah, I mean, I think 836 receiving yards is easily doable for Diontae Johnson. You got to take this over. Like I said, I'm loving it. Or if you don't want to take that, take his receptions, please. I mean, he gets targeted so much. He had 100. I mean, look at these last 3 years, ever since 2020. I mean, gosh, dang, he gets targeted a lot. And, of course, he needs 83 receptions. Like I said, he's going to get it. 88 receptions 2020, 107 2021, which is crazy, and 86 in 2022. I mean, I'm loving his lines. I'm not going to lie. So I think Diontae Johnson is still the number 1 receiver in Pittsburgh. I think you got to take these lines where they're at. Very good lines for Diontae Johnson. Alrighty, next up is George Pickens, another guy I am loving this year. This is another one of the guys. I love all 3 of these lines. I love his receptions. I love his receiving touchdown. I love his receiving yard. I love them all. Look at last year. We'll start with his receptions, I guess. He needs 55.5. Of course, he played a lot of games. He only had 52 catches, but again, this is his rookie year. He's just getting started. I love where that line's at. I think he can easily get 56 receptions easily. And then next up is his receiving touchdowns. It's at 4.5. He had 4 last year. Again, like I said, I'm just banking on that. I think he is going to have another blow-up year, and he's going to get to that 5 touchdown mark. I just think it's got to go up. Receiving yards, this is definitely my favorite line out of all. Is 780. He had 801 last year on 52 catches. He's only going to get better. So I think you got to take his receiving yards. Really like where it's at. And I believe that's all the Steelers receivers. Now, finally, on to the Browns receivers. Alrighty. One of my favorite receivers right here, fantasy-wise, and again, betting-wise, Amari Cooper. So the lines, I'll show you. First of all, we'll start with the receptions. I do not like his receptions personally. I just think 72.5 for him is, like I said, I would bet he would get it. But, they did bring in Elijah Moore. They got some weapons. Like I said, I don't think this is a bad mark for him, but it's still not my favorite. He got 78 last year. Like I said, he'd probably be fine for this mark. I honestly could change my answer here if I want to. I'd say you could definitely take the over. I wouldn't be mad at you, to be honest with you. But I love his receiving yards. I love his receiving touchdowns. He needs 7 receiving touchdowns. He had 9 last year, and he's obviously been pretty consistent, throughout his career. Like I said, he had 9 last year. He's got Deshaun Watson coming back. I think it's only got to get better for him. So I like where it's at 6.5. I think he can easily get at least 7. And then receiving yards, 950. He had 1,160 last year. And again, this is with Jacoby Brissett mostly. So it can't get much worse than that. So I would definitely take the over again there for him. And that's another guy I like a lot. And next up is Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore, I'm not really going to be looking at his stats too much because his stats don't really do him a justice. Specifically, what I mean by that is he was on the Jets with Zach Wilson. And he had obviously, I don't got to explain much besides that. But I just think, he showed flashes a couple years ago. And in his rookie year, he showed a lot of flashes. but he got hurt. And he would have hit this line with Zach Wilson, which is, again, saying something. So I just think, like I said, he's got to get, have a glow-up year. I think he's got to do a lot better receptions and receiving yards wise. So I would take the over on both these. And last, actually, I believe for this video, finally, is Donovan Peoples-Jones. This is another guy I am not going to show his stats just because, like I said, I've already, it's just I don't like either of these lines for him. He had a great year last year. He had like 800 receiving yards last year. But for me, it's just he's moved to that wide receiver 3 position, and it's just a more limited role. So I'd like to see him there before I say, hey, bet on him and everything like that. So I would just avoid him completely. And that is it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you guys want me to do another one of these. This was a lot of work, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next one. Peace out.